are doing the Just Culture training today. And the way that Todd and I kind of like to start this off is by giving our definition that we've taken away from trainings so that you're not spending 10 minutes wondering what the heck we're getting at in the beginning of our presentation. So I'll start and I'll just say, for me, the definition of Just Culture is under the safety net umbrella of safety for patients on campus. And so under Just Culture, what we want to do is we want to shift the ways in which we look at employee errors that actually end up harming patients from employee mistakes to systems issues. So what we're trying to shift is the immediate response for employees to get in trouble when something happens where there's patient harm, to zooming out as supervisors and leaderships and thinking, what might have the system done wrong here for us to move forward?
Enter the conference.
Okay. And how about you? What did you take away from them?
Yes, so I really kind of like the part where it allows us to be in trouble and make mistakes and not get hammered to the wall for it, and recognize that we are human and we have that within us, and we have a system that allows that versus a system that doesn't allow it, and then anytime we violate that, we get in trouble for it. So we can change the system to fit with us. I really, that appeals to me a lot.
So that should give you kind of an idea of what we're shooting for moving into this. And we'll also say that this isn't something that's going to change overnight. I think they're really shooting for a long-term shift. And what I really appreciate about all of this is that once we have this information, we can use it to benefit our patients when we see that there is a systems issue. The VA nationwide is pushing for this. So when we see issues, we're going to reference this in trying to get systems issues fixed.
Naomi, I have a comment to both of your definitions, and you know this, but I asked you several weeks ago, doesn't a Just Culture already exist? Because as a supervisor, I live looking at things justly, and I was very surprised when you said that's not the reality. And I've been strangely perseverating on this for a while since you told me that. Why don't we already live in a Just Culture?
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be penalized when you make a mistake. You should be able to raise your hand and say, I made a mistake, and let it be looked at within the realm of what happened and how do we fix it, rather than penalizing the one person who was brave enough to raise their hand.
Mm-hmm. And you'll see in the content in the slides, and we really get into conversation about this too because of the conversations that we had during the training, that we think it's really important to bring up where, and we'll get into this, but the staff say, you know, I don't see this. Here's what I see in my department. And we'll also get into how leadership and supervisors have to take the lead in this so that we know at our level that it's a safe place to report issues, even if it means that it's something that we did wrong, but we want people to learn from it. And so, yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the objectives for the whole entire slideshow. We're going to talk about a high reliability organization, what that is and how Just Culture fits underneath it, or how they relate to each other. Then we're going to talk about human error and how to reduce harm through looking at the lens of human error. Stopping the line is how we step in if it's not our role typically, but we see something that might cause patient harm. What does it look like to stop the line, and when is it appropriate? And then we're going to talk about the behavior and responses. So a lot of people at the beginning of our presentation start thinking about, well, yeah, but sometimes people just mess up and they do need like some sort of like punishment or that kind of thing. And so we're going to get into different kinds of behavioral choices versus human error, and how we as a campus will be responding to that, and as supervisors. Okay, so a high reliability organization is two main features. It is a big campus like ours, or a big entity like an airport that has the vulnerable situations. So one small thing could end up in a big mistake. But the second piece is very important. We have that vulnerability being a big system, but we have very little harm that is actually being done because of systems like Just Culture. And so that's what we're shooting for with high reliability organization. experience fewer than anticipated accidents or events of harm, despite operating in the highly complex, high-risk environments. Okay. The actual definition, an atmosphere of trust in which people are encouraged to provide essential safety-related information. Individuals trust that they will not be held accountable for systems failures, but are also clear about where the line must be drawn between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And then this last piece I want to talk about with you, accountability and trust between staff and leadership. And so the conversation that we had in our Train the Trainer, so it was like a little bit more in depth for how we would be doing this at this level, we had some other folks in there that were going to be training from different departments. And a gal said, she kept shaking her head for like the first 20 minutes being like, yeah, okay, this isn't going to work, this isn't going to work. And finally when they probed, because it seems like the people that were training us were really interested in this working and interested in what errors might, or barriers might prevent us from having this work on campus. So she said in her department, people get written up constantly. So either people are turning you in to get written up, they'll say you did this, this, or this, or she did this, this, or this, or the actual supervisors are writing people up. They're just constantly watching and waiting. And she said, the reason that other people throw you under the bus is because that's like the only way to survive there. The only way to look, for you not to be looked at as if someone else is getting written up. And so we talked about like, okay, so do we just not do just culture in that department? Or what's the solution? We need these supervisors and the leadership on board here. And it's going to be a huge culture shift in that department. But what does that look like? So if we have like a supervisor that's on board, Deb, it sounds like you already want this to be happening on our campus. It's not going to take much to convince you at meetings, regular meetings, to say, remember, this is a just culture. I want you to come to me, like constantly. We need to know that. You know, it's not going to take much for you to learn how to do that, but in departments where there's people being written up all the time, that's a bigger systems issue. And so they all agreed in the training that day, including the leadership and the people that are really championing this, that we have to get these supervisors on board, and that might be uncomfortable. And so this last piece, we really feel strongly that it's one of the most important pieces. And then a couple concepts that are really important to Just Culture. We are human and vulnerable to errors. We're going to talk more about that. Everyone kind of knows what human error is, but what we're going to get into is really how it's not our choice when these errors occur in some situations. When you make an error, we want to feel safe owning it and reporting it. We want others to learn from the issues that we have that may end in harm for patients. When the errors happen, they're consoled. But when risky and reckless behavior happens, they're coached and or disciplined. Okay, so the first part here, this is the first kind of way to look at human error in kind of a funny way, but I really like this picture that they chose actually, because as someone pointed out, everyone around this person knows what's going on except for him. And that's really applicable to Just Culture on campus, because we want people to be able to step in and say, there's something you might not be noticing, even though I'm just at whatever level. I'm your employee or whatever. You might not be seeing this because you're super focused with whatever you're doing. He didn't choose to do this. He wouldn't have wanted to do this. The consequences stink. And so when we think about human error, this is like a perfect example, because we wouldn't want to fire someone for doing something, a human error like this. We would want to understand that maybe he's got a lot of stress, or maybe he's got something else going on, or maybe he's rushing to the daycare before he gets to work, or that kind of thing. We want to make everyone else aware of the implications of stress, or that kind of thing, that we can make sure at least there's something we can learn from it. Also, no one is immune, so this can happen to any of us. So next, as we start moving through the slides, we're going to talk about how we can go from human error to risky behavior. And the drift is in there. So the drift is basically, I like to compare it to driving when you get your license. You're really aware of how dangerous this gigantic car is that you're driving. And you follow the rules, and you 10 and 2, and you don't have your cell phone on you. But a year into it, maybe you even start losing some of those. Maybe you don't really look over your shoulder when you're turning, or you're not really 10 and 2 anymore. You listen to music a little louder, get into the music. And then a few years down the road, maybe later in life, we might have our cell phone right here. and we might cause some serious harm because we're not paying as much attention and we are becoming complacent. That's not okay, but it happens. Again, nobody's immune to this, but it happens and we have to be aware of it. In those circumstances, depending on the consequences of someone's behavior, we would go beyond consoling. We would be probably moving into, this is a behavioral choice and there needs to be consequences. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. All right, so the drift. For those on the phone, and I'm sorry I didn't explain the first image was the picture of someone that drove off with a pump, and we were talking about how that was human error. This image is a man under his truck working on it, but the truck is not being held up by a safe jack. It's being held up by 2x4s, and he's also welding underneath the gas tank. And so when we talk about drift, this guy, when he started working on cars, maybe he had all the parts. Maybe a couple years ago his jack broke, and so he's making do, but he's still getting the work done. Now his friend or partner might not be so into the way that he's working here, and they could step in and say, I'm just gonna mention something. I'm noticing you could die. I'm noticing that what you're doing is not safe and it's risky behavior. I want you to be aware of that because of the consequences that could happen. Just because you've been in this for so long, you might not really see it from an outside perspective or from someone that loves you or the patients that we work with. Keep in mind, behavioral choices. Okay, and so as we shift into the second part of this training, we want to kind of zoom into that, what it means to stop the line, and why it might be really important for someone from outside of your role or your expertise to step in and say, I see something that doesn't seem right. I'm going to play a quick video, and I'll explain the video for the folks online after I play it.
Naomi, when you're rolling this culture out, are you recommending that your colleagues or your direct line to direct line, how the chain of command works? I personally would like to see Chris say, Sarah, hey, I'm noticing something. Not have Chris immediately go to Sarah's supervisor.
Yeah.
So is that the philosophy of starting the communication?
Yeah, that goes with like the kind of how I think what they wanted us to start with that baseline and then implement the culture. So I have at least always been trained that it's most important to try to go to the person that you see the issue with first. And that's kind of all the examples that they give us, and we'll give you more as well that we came up with. It's always typically about going to that person first. But sometimes we'll find that these are systems issues and that need to be taken up to leadership and supervisors. All right, so just watch the video and it'll give you some prompts on the screen for you to participate.
I got 13.
Nice, you win.
Oh my gosh. I still don't see you.
That's awesome.
Did you see the moonwalking human dressed up as a bear?
No, I
They're showing us.
Can I? Okay. Okay, let's write here.
See that right there?
There he is.
didn't. Oh, okay. He's dressed so similarly.
I know.
Totally.
So I'm just gonna explain to the folks online. What we saw was people tossing a basketball, some dressed in black and some dressed in white, and the video asked you to see how many times the people dressed in white passed the ball. So as you're watching the video, you're counting the ball being passed between white dressed individuals. And meanwhile, there's a bear that goes onto the middle of the screen and then moonwalks backwards off. And many people don't see the bear because they're so focused on how many times the ball was being passed. The point of this video is to show you that when we are hyper-focused in what we're doing, sometimes we can miss things. And so Todd's going to take over now and take that one step further with a real situation that happened.
So there is a patient. Her name was Elaine Bromley, and that's her there. She's a 37-year-old female mother of 2, and she went into a hospital for an elective surgery. And for this surgery, it wasn't life-saving or critical in that way. It was just elective. And she had gone under anesthesia, and the surgeon and the anesthesiologist were trying to establish an airway for supported breathing, put a tube down her trachea, right? So intubator. And as they were trying to do this, they worked on it, and they were working on it for nearly 30 minutes. And so she was out under anesthesia, and the nurses who were observing and watching noticed that while this was going on and that these 2 doctors were struggling to get this breathing tube in, that her oxygen saturations dropped to about 40%. It's pretty low, right? And so they took an emergency tracheotomy kit and placed it next to the doctors and walked away. And that was it. The doctors didn't see it, and after 30 minutes, they decided to abort the procedure and to bring her out of anesthesia. And when she came to, it had been too much. She had already suffered brain damage. They transferred her to ICU, where she ultimately succumbed and died. And so this is an example of not stopping the line and bad communication. And a little bit about what Naomi was mentioning earlier about how we work in a field where there's high-risk stakes, people's lives at stake, right? Same with airplanes, you know. One loose bolt could lead to a plane going down. Well, some person not washing their hands or not communicating well can lead to a death. And the type of communication that they talk about in this is called hinting and hoping. So when we see something that happens that's a patient safety violation or a concern, and we're not really direct about it, right? We're talking about speaking up and all this, but if we don't do it in the right way, it still doesn't happen, and it's not effective. And so it gives us guidance on how we can do that. It's the 3 W's, which would be what I see, what I'm concerned about, and what I want. So an example that this nurse could have done is, hey doc, I see that her oxygen levels are getting down about 40%. I'm concerned that she could have some brain damage from this, and here's an emergency trach kit. Because right now it looks like you have blinders on and you're not seeing everything. Kind of like the guy arc welding underneath the truck, right? But didn't have this training, this communication, this wherewithal. In some organizations, there's this hierarchy. Maybe she didn't feel comfortable even talking to the doctor because she's a nurse and he's a doctor, or their doctor, and they're not comfortable with that, you know. We also had, in the same training that Naomi mentioned, there was a nurse from another department that said that they had witnessed a doctor doing something that was really a risk, but they were giving a bad dosage or an incorrect dosage or something like that, and they wanted to speak up, and the doctor kind of put them in their place. And she was really wanting some sort of a catchphrase or something like, I don't know what she even gave examples of, but something like, stop the line, hold on, pal, you're like really tunnel focused here, so we need to just have that to snap us out of it. So kind of circling back to the mistakes versus risky behavior versus reckless behavior. Human error defined is an inadvertent mistake, a cognitive slip, or a lapse that leads to an outcome that wasn't intended. So we already talked about kind of the gas station pump hose that's stuck on the car. That was not a choice. An example that I can think of, because that's just daily life, right? But how do we apply this to us and what we do day to day? And in these trainings, they use a lot of hospital examples, like a lab person going to get labs from somebody and they don't do their double verifications, or they put their label down and walk away for a second and come back and the vials got switched. That doesn't really apply to us, right? Like, we don't deal with that. And so kind of an example I could think of, and I'd welcome any other input as well, and I bet we've all done this, I know I have, accidentally sent an unencrypted email that should have been encrypted, right, that had patient health information. I remember my first, maybe second week at West Valley, the place I worked at before here. And we had such a heavy patient load, and we had like 5 discharges in one day, and they were all leaving. And part of the, I'm sure we have it here too, the continuation of care is like you have to fax all your records on to the next place so they know what's going on, med list and psych evals and progress notes and all that. And so I sent those wrong notes to the wrong place. And it was Terry Riley, they called me back and they just hammered me up and down, and it was a mistake, I didn't mean to, and there's disclaimers on the fax cover sheets that say if you got this accidentally, but like it's something that we deal with here in healthcare. They're mistakes.
An example as
yeah.
well. Should I use so when we were providing the training for all of the outpatient or social work department, we had people give examples, which you're very welcome to if you can come up with something right now too, because it really helps.
Into the mic, though, when you...
Oh yeah, you have to come up here if you want. So someone mentioned, and I thought this was really thinking outside the box. They were thinking, what have I done that I feel like is a human error? And it was someone mentioned, well, sometimes I forget to attach people on notes. And everyone in the room was like, I mean, you could see people's gears turning. And when we're thinking just culture, we're thinking, how could that not be, her issue? Because we have to, it's our responsibility every single time that we see someone. And I was like, I thought about it for a while. I thought about it in the shower later. Like I thought about it a couple times thinking, how could this be a systems issue that we could fix? And then I thought about how in our emails, when we say we're going to attach something, it reminds us to attach it. And so I thought, I don't know if we're going to have, I don't know how CPRS functions or what our next computer system is going to look like that comes in. But if Outlook can do it, and so those are the kind of like situations on campus where actually not attaching a provider could mean harm. And so that was an example that I was really grateful for. And I followed up with her and I was like, I'm going to see what I can do. We'll see. But does anyone else have examples that they want to come and speak into the mic about? Do you want to ask anyone on the line if they have examples?
How about you out there in Seabach land? Any examples you'd like to share?
This is Christine. I can relate to some of them, forgetting to add somebody to a view alert or, I'm pretty good at catching unencrypted emails, but, we all do those things, get in a big hurry and there's too much to do. And so, yeah, I can relate to what's been said.
Thanks, Christine.
Sure.
Okay, so let's kind of move on from the human error, the mistake side, and go to the next level, kind of the risky behavior. And this would be kind of like when you make a choice about it. An example I could think of, and again, we'll welcome any others. So let's say we all have kind of a common area, maybe where we work, maybe up in Building 114. Out at the kind of the main check-in area, the main desks there. And we get in a conversation with another provider and we start discussing personal details about a patient, maybe even say their name out loud, right? And it's overheard by passerbys, people walking by. And maybe one of these people has malicious intent. They know this person and they can go take advantage of them or something like that. But us providers, we know better. Right? We know we shouldn't be having those confidential conversations out in the middle of a lobby, right? Or in an elevator or something like that. So I think that's kind of a choice that we make, an example of something that's applicable to all of us. I would probably define as risky. How about you all? Any other examples that you have? And I'll repeat it in the mic so you don't have to. It's okay if not.
Actually, I have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
When I was working in the kitchen, I accidentally took a tray into one of the rooms where the patient had passed away. And even though the patient had passed away, I came back to the food service area and said, Mr. So-and-so has passed away, and immediately was ushered into the room to be written up for disclosing his name out in the hallway. I was shell shocked.
Right. Right.
There.
Yeah, kind of a mistake, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big mistake.
But was it risky? Was it inadvertent?
It was human error.
Yeah.
I would define that as human error unless it's occurred again and again and
No,
again.
it was the first time.
Right. Right.
You know,
And
hey,
last time.
let's remember, what patient privacy looks like, and let's not do it again.
Mhm.
Which would be defined as consoling,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
like
we-
if it happened over.
And there's a matrix in a little bit. We'll get into a little bit more kind of the responses to these examples. Thank you for sharing that. That's a good example.
And I'm jumping ahead, but I'm thinking of the drift, because drifts occur. And should the person be responsible for not drifting? Absolutely. But perhaps, step 1 through 10 on their safety checklist is so automatic
Mhm.
that it's easy for them, and they forget to do they drift away from
Right.
number 2 and number 4 and number 7. They may not recognize that drift, and someone else could identify that for them. So I do recognize that drift is behavior, but who is the appropriate person to step in, identify that, and then the person as supervisor would need to oversee that.
Right. Right.
Non-punitively at first, but whatever.
And so many times, like through this, like examples are given where it doesn't matter who's speaking up, and it could feel it should be lowest level possible, and then escalated from there. Yeah.
I have just kind of a question when I'm thinking about all this kind of stuff. I've got some hearing issues, and sometimes I have patients on speakerphone. And I, is there somebody in the other office or not, and are they saying something or not? And so it's so much easier with speakerphone, but then if it's Starcy, I'll pick up the phone and talk to them. But what about when we're doing the telehealth stuff, and I'll have to have them speaking at a level that I actually can hear, which is unfortunately pretty loud, and that may go into the other walls, and they may say something that, another patient could hear.
Have you thought about using dual microphone headphones?
Well, I have hearing aids, and so it's difficult to have things on top of those.
Okay.
And I think that there's been many occasions where I can hear people outside in the hallway, whether or not they're on speakerphone, because they have hearing problems, so we're yelling, do you have a difficult time going to the back,
Right.
And so I think it's a systems issue.
Right,
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Another systems issue, there's a department here in the hospital who has patient names on a board and shower curtains, like for barriers, like for communication. Like it's really easy to violate patient safety there.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us have covered and worked in that place, and so it's applicable to us. I'm not trying to talk about some other place and sharpshoot them from here, and that's a really difficult environment to work in and be really good ourselves, and it's a hard place for us to go in and fix that system too. So there's
for social workers and perhaps other people who identify strongly with boundaries. It's quite hard for us to go into a system and try to implement our boundaries on all of them.
right.
Yep.
They can come across really abrasive to those folks. Yeah, for sure. So this is why we're doing this hospital-wide, not just department and everything like that. Okay. So with the last one, with mistakes, we're consoled. Hey, it's okay, hang in there, mistakes happen. With risky behavior, it's coached, right? All right, this is what the policy is. You drifted away from it. Let's get back online. Some coaching. Now with reckless behavior, this is when discipline can occur. It's not a must. It's not a causation, but it can occur. And kind of with us, I think automatically of like impaired provider, like you show up to work drunk or you're lying, blatantly lying on notes, saying things that didn't happen, or saying you saw people that you didn't see or whatever like that. And I want to say I don't think any of us are doing that, and I bet there's other VAs that they didn't think that was going on, and surprised it was. So reckless behavior can happen. So we need to be obviously vigilant about it as well. And so this is when we're going to see more of the discipline. Any feedback on that?
Kickers.
Okay. All right, we just kind of really touched this. This is just kind of a brief review. This is a slide that we're looking at here that just talks about what we just talked about. How about we can send them the slides afterwards? Does that work so they can kind of see it?
And I'm curious, so I'm looking at it as a supervisor. So we used, when we did performance improvement plans, which have kind of gone by the wayside, we had a very specific to-do list in order to coach, discipline.
yeah.
I can't remember
Yeah.
I can't remember my own stuff, but how does this philosophy work in terms of kind of remembering where we've been with this employee and where we go next?
Well, I think this is just me like hip shooting because I don't really know.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a preface. But I would suspect a lot of those processes are already still there. And if it gets to the point where there needs to be discipline in place, like you would still follow that process. Would be my guess.
I worked with a reckless employee once, and it started off with consoling, coaching, and then discipline. And I hated the discipline, but I did it anyway because I needed to. So I want it to be absolutely non-punitive in the beginning and have a clear understanding of step.
Right. I don't think it's clearly defined,
Okay.
to be honest. Do you know of any left and right limits on that, and what's?
I think the coach, the tool that they
There is
have.
a decision matrix.
Cool.
Yeah, you want to
Okay.
hand that around?
And we get
If
a
you
copy
want
of
to
the
pass this
slides.
around.
Yeah.
So they try to be, and I think it's in development, they try to be, give you a step-by-step, like, I think this is clear, but we're not looking at exact examples exactly. We have like kind of basic examples for what would fit into where, but these cards are supposed to be for supervisors to utilize. And they said that they're not
This is
mass
what that
distributing
card
them yet
is.
for supervisors, but they probably will in the future as we get roll more into this culture.
Yeah, we were hoping for everyone. You say that everyone want to have it.
Yeah.
It'd be nice because then we kind of know what standards we're held to as everyday employees. So more to follow. Oh, there it is right there. So this is just like a decision tree that you'll see in the slide deck when we email that out about at what point does something move from risky to reckless to from mistake to risky to reckless. I'm not going to go too in depth in that. I think we get. Yeah. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a slide. It's called the Joint Patient Safety Reporting System. And this is a way to report safety violations. And these reports go to Tammy Sanchez. And an important thing, so this is available in AppMan. So admin, incident report, right there. So it's pretty easy to find. So you just click admin on AppMan and then go down to incident report. And actually, after doing this training last week, an employee got a hold of me and we walked through. This is the first time I'd actually seen it. Walked through submitting one. So there's a way to do it. As you do it, you can put your name in there, or you can do it and put fear as your name. That way you're like fear of retaliation, or you don't want your name out there, kind of anonymous, right? What's important is the who, the what happened, and the where it was, and those kind of details of it, so it can be followed up with. So this is another reporting tool if you're not able to go to a peer or a supervisor. Maybe it is a supervisor and you need to go above that level. This is a way to kind of to go about that. So, any questions with that?
Is this Tammy Sanchez?
She's the patient safety manager. Okay, so in conclusion here, key concepts. Yeah, this is a repeat of slide one pretty much. So we are human, we're vulnerable to errors. When you make an error, we own it and report it. Reporting allows others to learn and systems designed to reduce future events. When human errors occur, staff will be consoled and risky and reckless behavior will be coached or disciplined. So, seeing a lot of nods. I think we're all in agreement. I think this resonates, makes sense, right? And some of the other departments, they're going to have a harder time rolling this out than I think we will. I also kind of remember that conversation Naomi was talking about where this particular department has to be right pretty much every time. Like they can't be wrong. So if you need to have an exact result and it needs to be precise and you're not, or it's something else or some other, like it can have big problems. So I think we have a little more leeway sometimes in what we deal with because a lot of our work is in the gray. So anyway, any final questions or anything you'd like to share? Okay. How about on the line?
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.